Hello, everyone. Nation Watch for today's Sunday, 9th February 2025. We are in an election year, and you can tell because of the poison pouring out from Freedom House that we are, in fact, in an election year. The People's National Congress Reform and all opposition political parties in the Cooperative Republic of Guyana continue to demand biometrics and a clean voters list. And we reflect at this time that as recent as 2015, when the People's Progressive Party lost government, it was Bharat Jagdeo, champion of dirt, who in fact started to champion the call for a clean voters list and biometrics, something he has now turned his back on, as he has done to the people of this country. Listen to the duplicitous Bharat Jagdeo.
We are going to make changes with our commissioners. We are going to argue for several changes at GCOM. First of all, we believe that Surge Valley does not have what it takes to deliver free and fair elections.
And this is since the last election?
Yes, we believe that he has succumbed to pressure, that he has allowed this institution to act in a partisan manner, and he is in charge. You can't put the blame on the chief elections officer. He's in charge of GCOM, and therefore the party has called for him to resign. But further to that, we need to make sure that the list is cleaned up so that people, the abuse that we had, where when you had sympathetic presiding officers to the opposition, allowing people who should not have voted to vote because they had extra ballots for people who had migrated and were or are dead in the polling stations, that if you have a new clean list, that will minimize that happening because they would not have the ballots in the polling station. Secondly, we need enhanced biometrics.
Enhanced
Some
biometrics.
presiding officer
Enhanced
said that we had
biometrics.
some cases in Victoria.
Bharat Jagdeo called for a clean voters list and enhanced biometrics, something that the entire country, except those resident at Freedom House, now call for in the face of a bloated list, a list that is bloated by in excess of 200,000 names, a list that is as large as the actual population of our country, hence the government's refusal to release the report of Census 2022. The struggle continues, ladies and gentlemen, for biometrics at the place of poll and a clean voters list. I'd like to now introduce my guest for today's program. He is, of course, no stranger to the Guyanese population. If he was 2 weeks ago, he certainly stopped being a stranger to the Guyanese population. Dr. Terrance Campbell has emerged as a champion of the people of this country by challenging the status quo and by exposing a number of very, very important issues regarding the patrimony of this country. Dr. Campbell, I'd like to welcome you to Nation Watch and thank you, as I do, for taking time out. I know you were out, you were busy, and you happily accepted the opportunity to join us in Nation Watch, for which the team Nation Watch and the rest of Guyana are grateful. Thank you for joining.
Good morning, Mervyn. Thanks for having me on Nation Watch again. This is my second rodeo. I was on, I think, about a month ago. And as usual, you know, the nicest thing about coming, well, not the nicest thing, but I enjoy coming on Nation Watch because I like to hear the battle song. Literally, I'm dancing to the battle song as you guys. It warms me up. So I'm looking forward to a good and fruitful discussion between us on the issues of the day, and they got so many things we can talk about, and as we delve into those issues. Thanks again for having me.
Right. So there are a number of issues on the table, but one that is of interest to the Guyanese voters right now is whether, in fact, there was a conversation that resulted in Terrance Campbell being asked by Irfan Ali to join him on his campaign trail as prime ministerial candidate. Now, here's what we knew when Terrance Campbell said that this happened. He was responding to Mr. Jagdeo, who had said some very nasty things about Terrance Campbell, the business person, Terrance Campbell, the employer, Terrance Campbell, the individual, the professional, disparaging remarks. And so Terrance Campbell's response included pointing to the invitation by Irfan Ali to join him as prime ministerial candidate, something that Irfan Ali himself denied. Never happened. Impossible. And then you came back, well, not you, but the news report, I think it was Demerara Waves that initially reported the denial by Mr. Ali, came back with a subsequent report saying, look, we have seen evidence that this conversation took place, and we're satisfied that this conversation took place, and so on. Now, that was not the end of the matter. Irfan Ali said, when asked for a comment, that he has nothing further to say on the matter, reminiscent of when questions were asked about a certain degree. Now, here's what Jagdeo said. I think this is today. Here's a report. This is another Demerara Waves report. I hope the PPP don't say, like they said with Lal, GHK Lal, that you bought Demerara Waves. Mr. Jagdeo rhetorically asked whether, quote, you think we're a stupid party, end quote, to select a businessman, Terrance Campbell, who had in 2019 stated that he had dedicated his entire life to prevent the PPP from winning a parliamentary majority in the 65-seat National Assembly. Goes on to quote Jagdeo, who as follows, we'll be extraordinarily stupid to do that. His name never even surfaced in the process that I launched, so there could have been no offer to him, and that could have only come from me after the discussion with the executive, not from the presidential candidate. So here is Jagdeo saying that he is Lord and Master, it has to come from him and no one else, and that it never came. Talk to us, please, Dr. Campbell, about this thing, and let's put to bed who's lying.
I don't know that we're gonna ever put it to bed. But Marvin, give me a minute to just go back to your opening video. You know, my emergence. I mean, I've been kind of below the radar publicly. I've always been commenting on matters political, but in the last 2 months, there's been virtually daily battles taking place, and it was over the NRF. And I think a comment that I made in the public domain said that Mr. Jagdeo had a genetic predisposition for eating his cake and having it. And it would be remiss of me with that opening video that you put out there on the biometric situation, not to highlight to viewers that I was not wrong. But I don't want to have a distraction over whether I am making racist comments, because I was not. So I will say Mr. Jagdeo has a penchant for eating his cake and having it. And here yet again, I think I highlighted about 3 things. I think it was renegotiation, fossil fuels, and what was the third one? I don't remember. Oh, the renegotiation,
Right.
Fossil fuels, and there was a third one. I can't even remember now. So much been going on. But the point here is another case of Mr. Jagdeo calling for biometrics in 2015, coming to power again in 2020. But once he is in power, biometrics was no longer important. And so there's been no movement on biometrics. Let me add my voice to that of the entire opposition in saying it is absolutely important for this next election to be free and fair and produce a credible result. So now to the question of the prime ministerial issue. If Terrance Campbell does not speak an idle word in the public domain, if you and I are having a private conversation, Mervyn, I might explore possibilities for which I don't have concrete evidence. But once I speak in the public domain, I have concrete evidence. And Mr. Jagdeo has nuanced this last response because indeed the conversation took place before my declaration in January 2019 that the reason I was joining ANOG was to ensure that the PPP did not return to power. I said that in 2019, and I say it today. I would not like to see Barrett Jagdeo back in power again. But that was not said. That was said after the offer was made. The discussions were had. And when we look at Mr. Jagdeo's actions, since he has returned to power, anybody in this country would understand why I took the position that I would put my efforts towards ensuring he did not return to power. I'm sorry I didn't put more efforts into it, but just ANOG was not the correct vehicle. So there was a discussion, right? There was a discussion where I was asked to be, I'll say the words, the running mate. That's what the receipt has. And the Amaro Waves, I believe, is in possession of that receipt. It is in black and white. I don't want to get into a back and forth over whether an offer was made. I deliberately limited it. So the Amaro Waves has the receipt. They made, I'm disappointed that Mr. Cabral did not challenge Mr. Jagdeo at the time and say, well, we have a receipt. But the Amaro Waves is in possession of that receipt. And that's why the Amaro Waves made the statement saying evidence has surfaced in the public domain. We have important issues to tackle in this country, important policy issues. I don't want to further distract discussions and focus on those policy issues as well as issues like the weaponization of private groups and the police against those in the opposition ranks. Those are the important things, the NRF, the agriculture sector, the health sector, the education sector. I want to focus on those issues. But I will say this, Mervyn. In order to avoid a back and forth over the prime ministerial issue, I'm saying, without fear of contradiction, and a discussion was had. During the discussion, I said, I am not interested. I'm interested in constitutional reform. That there is a receipt. That was a discussion prior to the comment that Mr. Jagdeo likes to refer to, where I said that I want to prevent the PPP returning to power. There was a discussion prior to that. And the receipt is from March of 2020 in the immediate aftermath of the election. That receipt is in the possession of the Amaro Waves. I want us to focus on the issues. However, and I'm throwing this down to Mr. Jagdeo, because I am not afraid, as one lawyer said to me, he said, Terrance, being put in handcuffs and taken through the court, right, is an honor for somebody who might be entering the political domain. That is a badge of honor. So I don't care all the threats that Mr. Jagdio is issuing, right? He can issue as many threats as he wants. I am saying to him, I am leaving that matter to rest. If he wants to continue on that subject, I'm challenging him. I will say where I was when I was visited, and I was visited like Nicodemus in the night. There are witnesses to the visit. I will say where the discussions took place. I will say what we drank, and I will then produce the receipts. I'm telling Mr. Bajagdio, let us focus on the important issues. And there are people, that receipt is saved in numerous different locations. Terrance Campbell, everything that I produce in the public domain, there is a receipt for it. And I want to put that matter to rest and let us focus on the important things. NRF, lands issue, corruption, education, agriculture, health. Listen, I could talk about the things that are going wrong and some of the things that are going right in this country for the next 5 days straight. So I'm putting it to rest that there was such an offer and there are receipts, and Mr. Jagdio should leave if he got any sense. Let me say, monkey must know which limb to jump on. If he has any sense, leave it alone. Because I will come, if he only raises it on Thursday, I will come, at that point, I will put aside any agreements to focus on the issues, and I will come into the public domain with my receipts. So if Mr. Jagdio got sense, leave it alone.
Right, and your friends seem to have fallen into a line that is consistent with some other advice. I remember when I was for the first time dragged out of my house and taken to the Leonora police station under heavy security by the Guyana police force one night. When it got out, of course, there was no social media and so it had to go from person to person. When it eventually got to a high-flying PPP official in Region 3, where I live, he said to me, Merv, now you're a politician. That's the way they see it. As long as they brutalize you and you stand up and you don't die, you qualify to call yourself a politician. But ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it from Dr. Campbell. He has the evidence. He is more concerned with the greater issues at hand that involve moving our country forward, and is not inclined to be distracted unless Jagdio insists on carrying the line. So I might have to start addressing you as Honorable Prime Minister, sir.
Let me be clear, Mervyn. I'm looking forward to a united opposition slate, and I don't care where I serve. I am happy to serve as a constable. I am determined, as someone who just turned 60, to see Guyana change to the better, to see constitutional reform and protections put in place so that no government in the future can trample over its citizens and the rights of its citizens. That is my goal.
Well, 60-year-old Terrance Campbell certainly looks a whole heap better than the very youthful president of Guyana. I want to move, now that we have that out of the way and citizens understand where we are on that issue and the truth about the issue, I want to move to another area, and I'm going to play another clip from Barrett Jagdio as I introduce the next topic that we're going to have this conversation on. So we go to this.
They sold us out to the foreigners. The oil companies, every time there is a find out there, our people should be sad because nothing comes our way. We're going to renegotiate those contracts because that's not what we had in mind. When we were in the early days, we were coaxing the people to go along. They came into office, 3 billion barrels of proven reserves, and then gave up
a zero royalty, no taxes, no ring fencing.
Right. Nothing comes to us. They sold out, meaning the AP and UAFC coalition sold out to the investors. And he's talking here, ladies and gentlemen, about oil. The People's Progressive Party came to government. We are still not sure whether they came to government by legitimate means, but there was a declaration that was inconsistent with the recount, but it is what it is. And they have now turned about face when it comes to this commitment to renegotiating. And they have, in fact, themselves decided to put their hands in the cookie jar instead of what they accused others of doing, selling out the country's patrimony. So, Dr. Campbell, comment for us, please, if you will, on the question of the position taken by Jagdeo and the PPP pre-2020 and what's happening now in the particular sector.
Mr. Jagdeo has the ability to speak with passion on both sides of the coin. As you pointed out in that little clip, he was all for renegotiating the contract. And he raises issues like no taxes, zero royalty, ring fencing, and so on. None of that has changed. He didn't consider ring fencing for the last 5 years, and it's becoming a kind of a moot issue at this point. I would say that Jagdeo lacks the sophistication to deal with this, to deal with Exxon. And every day, Mervyn, I've been a businessman. My professional life started 40 years ago. I've been a businessman for about 37 years. And every single day, contracts are renegotiated. You don't have to have a big shout about it. And sometimes you can look. I personally believe that there is a way to renegotiate the contract that would be revenue neutral even to Exxon. And it's from the tax angle. I think, but it would require a lot of research on Exxon, where they're headquartered, how they do the tax dodging. And globally, a lot of countries signed on to a minimum tax of 15%. So even some of those havens where Exxon would traditionally park, the last I remember, they run a company out of the Netherlands that's then owned by a company out of the Bahamas. But even the Bahamas has signed on, the last I checked, to this global minimum tax of 15%. We must ask ourselves, why should if and when the Bahamas implements that tax, why should the Bahamas be getting taxes on Guyanese oil and we're not getting it ourselves here?
Right.
I believe that there is a way for those who are sophisticated enough financially to sit down with Exxon quietly in a room and extract benefits from Exxon that are really revenue neutral to them, but would be a loss in some other jurisdiction. So in other words, there might be a way to finesse something where Exxon doesn't lose any money, some other jurisdiction that will perhaps end up getting taxes off of Guyana's oil, and bring that money home. There are ways to go about renegotiation, and that's only one possibility. I just throw that out as a possibility, but there are numerous other parts. But they will take research, and they require sophistication, financial sophistication, which Bharat Jagdeo does not possess.
Right, and you have been identified and you have accepted to serve as the opposition representative on the investment committee dealing with revenues flowing from the oil sector. You have come out and you have said very clearly that, well, first of all, this committee, I believe, was aborted out of the repeal and replacement of the Sovereign Wealth Fund that legislation, the Natural Resources Fund, it's called, I believe. And so lots of oversight bodies were thrown by the wayside in the replacement legislation. And this investment committee emerged as what ought to be the leading decision-making body in the entire process. As you have labeled it, in your estimation, you said publicly that it's nothing but a rubber stamp. And that is where a lot of things started to fall out from the woodwork in this country as far as Guyana's financial management and economy are concerned. Talk to us a little bit, Dr. Campbell, about the investment committee, what you understand the role of that committee to be, and what it's actually being handcuffed to do.
So generally, a sovereign wealth fund, usually it's natural resource revenues that are invested to provide for economic stability and future generations. In the news recently, there was a report on the dividends from the Norway's fund, massive. I think it was 200 and something billion. I don't remember the exact figure. So basically, you're investing your money, you know, in more sophisticated financial jurisdictions. People work, there are no pension schemes. Essentially, people work, they save their money and put it into mutual funds and so on. And then when they retire, that fund provides for them, they draw down, and those funds provide an income for them until they transition, until they pass. Essentially, the sovereign wealth fund is quite similar. It's about us taking the revenues from the oil sector, investing it prudently so that it can provide for future generations. And in that, it can provide some economic stability, because our country has known economic difficult economic cycles. So those funds will then help to smooth out some of those cycles. Guyana was unique in the sense that we do have, and I agree with the PPP government, that we do have some needs right now. We need to build up on human capacity, and we need to build up on some infrastructure. That does not mean we must spend everything that we get. Some needs to be invested. The PPP has gone, in my opinion, they have gone too far in the legislation and the amendment to the schedules of the NRF Act that permits them to withdraw currently as much as 95% of what is earned. And I think it's only a shame that they didn't take 100. What that does is effectively leave the investment committee without any work to do, because the Act says that the core fund, so they're not allowed to take out any interest that's generated from the fund. So that core fund that's building up has to be over 500 million before you can even look for higher yielding investment. But there is another caveat. That core fund must exceed 3 times what has been approved by the legislature for withdrawal in the previous year. Guyana will be plans to withdraw about 2.4, 2.5 billion in 2025. So the core fund will have to be about 7.5 billion before you can look for higher yielding investments. And the fund at the end of 2024 was just 3 billion. So basically, the investment committee does not have much to do at this point. I recently, basically, it's all left in Fed overnight deposits. I recently advanced an idea that maybe the core fund, we can look for alternative safe investments under the guidelines of the legislation for the core fund, which at the moment the government is unable to trouble. So, but my big issue, I recognize that I have no power over the legislature, and I can't tell the legislature that they can't withdraw 95%. My big issue was not that. My big issue is that once you withdraw that 95%, you must say what you're spending it on. It must not just be thrown into the consolidated fund, commingle with everything else to finance, birthday parties and Christmas parties and new Fortunas and so on. I want to know, and the people of Guyana want to know, from the time we realized that we were blessed with this oil find. Everyone in the country, every Guyanese, both locally and in the diaspora, has been concerned that those about the use, how we're going to use those funds, how we're going to invest them, and so on. And so, to satisfy the demands of our citizens, we ought to tell them, this is the money that we got from our oil resources, and this is how we plan to use it. And then we should report, this is how we have used it. And it's on this issue that the PPP government is terribly resistant, and it has led all the way down the road to even to the point of false allegations being made against me of threatening people to kill them and so on. All because the PPP government absolutely refuses to account for the use of our oil money. I have been drawn to this fight. This is not a fight that I didn't even think this would be a fight, Mervyn. I started internally in the fund sending messages to the board. But this is a fight that I've been drawn to, and it's a fight that I will not give up. Let me tell you that I have engaged senior counsel, local and overseas, and I'm hoping that before the end of this week, that a matter challenging the government on the use of the NRF funds will be filed. And amongst the things that we are praying for in our petition is for the government to account for the use of every single cent that they have withdrawn from the fund. So they should be well aware that if they lose that case, they're going to have to account for every single cent that they spent.
I'm coming right back to that. But before we explore that a little bit more, Dr. Campbell, I believe the marked difference between the coalition's approach to managing this fund and the PPPs is that the coalition made it clear that they were going to use a project-by-project approach in terms of utilization of resources from this fund, so that you had project-specific financing. And the things that you have just spoken about, what we're going to use it for, have we used it for that? What are the outcomes in terms of beneficiaries and value for money would have been obvious. But taking the money and putting it into the consolidated fund, recognizing that the oil revenue is what, 91% of national revenues, you don't get a real sense of what the non-oil sector is really funding. And you don't get a sense of how this oil money is being spent on people development. The leader of the opposition has often said, we want to see revenues from oil hitting people's tables, solving the problems of poverty. It's not happening. Do you believe that if we return to this project-specific financing approach, that we will get the best value from the oil revenues?
Let me say, and I've spoken about this previously, I have a slightly different approach that I think might be better. I've spoken about this, and I'll take the opportunity. I've been talking about this, I think, since as far back as 2017. Mm-hmm. And I remember in about 2018 or 2019, with a senior minister of the coalition government saying that I hadn't read, we were at a dinner in Washington, D.C. I said I had not read the old act. And because I figured if the government ever changed, they were going to repeal that act. And I think what we need to do is sit down as a nation, the PPP included. We need to be matured. This is not about us. This is about the country. Sit down as a nation and agree on an approach, whether it's a project approach or whatever approach we come up with. What are acceptable rates of depletion for the fund, bearing in mind that we have certain urgent needs of people development, and the opposition leader speaks often of people-centric development, and I support him on that, because I think development is mostly about people rather than buildings and roads. People first, buildings and roads and infrastructure come second. So I think we need to sit down as a nation, again, the PPP included, and arrive at whatever the approach is. And project-centered approach is not bad, but let's all sit down, talk. Let's agree acceptable rates of depletion for the fund. Let us look at the management of the fund and how much diversity we have, because as it is, especially on the board level, imagine, on the board level, I think it's 5, I don't remember, and the accounting and oversight committee, and then you have the investment committee, and of all of those, there's just one opposition representative stuck way down in the investment committee. I think we need to have a more diverse board, where we bring, once we've agreed on the approach, we must have a more diverse board. And once we've concretized that rates of depletion, areas for investment, how are we going to account for the funds, whether how are we going to withdraw the funds, project-centered or not, how are we going to account, transparency, application of Santiago principles, and then, Mervyn, it has to be embedded in the Constitution.
Precisely.
We cannot have this government or any government
arbitrarily changing anything.
Right, using our oil revenues and any other natural resource revenues as a political slush fund. And this is something I've been arguing for since I'm on record at the Turkantine talks, saying this NRF must be embedded into the Constitution. We cannot afford for if it is that Guyana encounters a problem that requires a change in the depletion, go to Parliament, get widespread acceptance, and then you make that adjustment. But this situation where the PPP could come in, change it, say we're going to take 80% out, and then those guys start enjoying the money flowing like water. The Essequibo during, when the water is rushing and they're enjoying themselves so much, and they say, no, come back, but we want 9 to 5. Actually, I believe in the discussions, they probably say we want 100, but somebody said, man, we can't do that. So that's a step too far. So we have to prevent that. And the only way is to embed the NRF after broad-based national discussions into the Constitution.
Right, you're a step ahead of me, because I have a note here that says infrastructure versus people development, and you've already dealt with that.
People come first.
Yes, people must come first, and they focus on infrastructure, and when one understands that there's almost zero accountability in spending on public infrastructure and where that is going, it is painful for that 48% who in Guyana live on $5 per day or less. But I want to come right back to that lawsuit.
1 second before we go to the lawsuit, just to add to the infrastructure, I doubt that we have the absorptive capacity for the amount of money that's being spent on infrastructure. They're giving every Tom, Dick, and Mervyn a contract to build a road, and those guys don't know anything about building roads and so on, and so money is being wasted essentially. I mean, I was traveling, I forget which road recently that had been done, and it's already breaking up. And this is a story straight across the country, just as we talk about roads. And really and truly, we cannot afford to go on like this. We're really wasting the national patrimony. So again, if we have a national discussion, then we can talk about absorptive capacity and pacing of infrastructure development, so that whatever we do it properly and it will last a long time.
The lawsuit, Dr. Campbell.
Yeah.
Now, what are the chances? Well, let me rephrase that. What becomes of the lawsuit after a change in government coming in 2025? This is the government of Guyana that is being taken to court. The government will change this year.
It must.
Yes, it will. And is there any, I don't understand how these things work very well, but is there any chance of personal criminal liability that can cause persons who are culpable to personally answer or be answerable for their actions, as opposed to a flat-out civil suit against a government that a succeeding government will have to defend?
Marvin, I've been told that because, let me put it out here now. I was advised as I was flying from Georgetown to the USA that the next move of the government is that on my return, Soku was going to be arresting me for money laundering and tax evasion. It's amusing because they're not going to find anything on me, money laundering and tax evasion. Tax evasion is something that Barra Jagdeo, because of a waiver. And the interesting thing, I'm diverting a little bit, I'll come back to the question. Sure. The interesting thing about that waiver is that when I was getting ready to write that waiver, the discussions were with Winston Brassington and Mr. Devendras Kisoon, attorney at law of London House Chambers. Mr. Brassington is a senior financial advisor to the government, has always been to the PPP government for decades, and is I think the main player behind the energy project. And
so many other
and so many. And Mr. Devendra Kisoon is a well-known, highly accomplished lawyer. They're both friends of mine, who represented the PPP in the election matters. So they were part and parcel of this discussion about applying for the waiver because 100 million had been paid. And now Mr. Jagdeo is unconcerned that his own legal counsel, PPP legal counsel, and his own financial advisor are part of this and waives the same thing and says tax evasion. The reason I bring this up is that you're asking me to discuss criminal liability when the government changes. I already got
I was talking about being embedded in the suit.
Hold on. I already got a false allegation. I already got threats of Soku and coming after me, which I'm told I've been advised will not happen. And so for me to speak to that is for them to resurrect some other agency that, against me. But so let me get to it. The thing about criminal liability, and I think I've addressed this in the public domain, in my exchanges with Ashni Singh, where, and it's strange, Mr. Jagdeo and Mr. Singh, they're cheerleaders for each other. Each one of them says, one says I got an ass whooping, the other one says I got a schoolyard something. Those guys cheer each other on. I raised about 5 issues about Ashni Singh, starting from the time he was at the Auditor General, starting with the whole issue with Supasad and the concessions at Sonata, moving through when the court ruled that he had spent money illegally, and all the way to the budget when last minute, I understand, under pressure from private sector, they reduced the higher rate, 40 to 35 for personal taxation. So they give more to the rich than they gave to the poor.
Yes.
In that exchange, I pointed out that Mr. Singh, he calls me Mr. Campbell, so I refer to him as Mr. Singh. Mr. Singh is now the minister in the office of the president with responsibility for finance and public service. That was no accident. That was to shield him.
Yep.
That was to shield him from potential criminal liability. So I don't think that there will be any criminal liability that will attach if this lawsuit is successful, simply because the guys have orchestrated the whole appointments under the ministry, orchestrated in such a way that the president,
Is the minister.
who is immune from criminal and civil suit, is actually the Minister of Finance. Whether they can be civil suits, potentially they can be civil suits. And this was my message to the board, because remember I sit on the investment committee, and I said to the message I sent to the board is, look, you guys are directors, and whether it's in a company or the board of the NRF or board of Central Housing and Planning Authority, you have fiduciary responsibilities. And if the Act says that this is how spending is to take place, national development priorities, and in relation to emergent special projects following natural disasters, and you do not take reasonable steps to ensure that that is what happens, then I think civil liability can be attached to board members and others who have oversight of the fund.
Yeah, I know there is a particular bit of legislation with which I'm fairly familiar. That is the National Insurance and Social Security Act. There are provisions in there for directors and officers of corporations to be held personally liable for certain things. So hence my question.
Right, and some companies, Mervyn, well, some directors in international practice, some people not come on your board unless they're protected by D&O liability cover. In other words, the company has to buy director and officer liability cover before they would even touch your board, because they understand that their responsibilities come in there. So to the extent that members of the board of the NRF, and it's not exclusive to members of the board, but to the extent that members of the board of the NRF continue to sign off on withdrawals that are not in accordance with the Act, civil liability, I believe, in my opinion, civil liability can be attached to them.
All right, so this lawsuit, I imagine will be heavy. I note that the judicial process is not as swift as we would perhaps like it to be. But the question of the government being required to answer for the spending seems to me as though it is the thing for us to have. But the question that arises is what level of frustration is going to be put in the path of this bit of litigation, which in my view and the view of many people I've spoken with, is in the best interest of our country.
And because it's in the best interest of the country, that's why I have gone to a great expense to find senior counsel who are willing to deal with it. I got considerable assistance from one gentleman in locating a regional senior counsel. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure about the process. I know that if it was a constitutional motion, those motions move with much greater speed. I don't believe that this falls within the line of a constitutional motion, but I would hope that the judiciary, at least the Chief Justice, would see this as a matter of urgent national importance and maybe give it that level of attention, the level of attention that it truly, truly deserves.
This question of embedding the sovereign wealth fund for posterity measures and for protecting the fund has been publicly referred to and recommended by the leader of the opposition, former Minister Jordan, economist and accountant Raul Lucas, and other people. And you are adding your voice to...
I might have been the first, Mervyn, since 2017.
Yeah, well, if 2017, definitely you may have been the first person to do so. So this, I believe, is absolutely necessary. I mean, you can't tinker with the Constitution.
No.
When it's there, the Constitution is subject to review, yes, but there are conditionalities regarding change to
Right.
the Constitution, two of which are A, national consultation, and B, a two-thirds majority in the National Assembly of the Parliament, which has to be reflective, obviously, of some high level of agreement among
Exactly.
political parties in there. So I believe this is perhaps a point that has to be the basis for a wider conversation like this, and eventually a national conversation in the not distant future. Dr. Campbell, I want to move on to another matter here. You, my my old man would have said, "You're troublesome," you know. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way.
No, it's true. I am troublesome.
You have requested an investigation at the level of the United States Department of Justice regarding the sale and acquisition of a property in New York, in the US. I believe that is reported, among other places, is reported in Stabrook News of February 3, 2025. That report names Sherwin Greaves, CEO of the Central Housing and Planning Authority, as he then was. He has since resigned. A number of things have popped up. Since this issue was raised, Greaves has resigned. There's a particular piece of this report which says here, he alleged that the sale of the home was facilitated by a close family member of controversial businessman Ed Ahmad, and asked the Department of Justice, that's DOJ, to investigate the seeming quid pro quo for favors to be granted in Guyana in violation of the FCPA. Quote, violations of the FCPA are usually treated seriously by the DOJ, and I'm hoping they will investigate, Campbell told Stabrook News yesterday when contacted. Quote, it appears that the property was purchased without a mortgage. If that is the case, then questions of corruption and money laundering arise, end quote. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a newspaper report that I'm referring to. I'm not making this up. So I don't think question of, well, let me move on. So Dr. Campbell, you have produced evidential material supporting this request for investigation. Since then, not only has this gentleman resigned, but in a report today, I'm looking for it here. It's a report that was done by Travis Chase. I believe it's the Nightly News outfit. Breaking news. FBI agents reportedly raided the home of convicted Guyanese fraudster Ed Ahmad in Queens, New York on Saturday. Over 500 ounces of gold, a quantity of cash and other documents were allegedly removed from the home by the feds, sources related to Nightly News. So here it is. This story is really, really exploding. Talk to us a bit about what motivated the call for the investigation, because this is really a national issue being taken on by a single individual in the interest of a country. What drove you, sir?
I am a businessman who has had to crawl tooth and nail over 40 years in Guyana. There are many times that I've been frustrated. In fact, frustration is how I became a friend of the current president. Central Housing, the folks there used to frustrate me terribly. I wouldn't pay any bribes, and on occasion I had to reach out to him and he would remove the bottlenecks that I was facing. No quid pro quos. So I have an anti-corruption passion. The several of the businesses that I've dealt with over the years, Dairy Queen, Federal Express, we are subject to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, so I'm well aware of that act, how to report, what it requires, and so on. And lastly, as I look, and I make no bones about this, as I look at the sheriff group in Guyana, I see, listen, Mervyn, I applied for permission to put up a building at Sue's Dyke by the junction. It took me 1 year to get an approval. And the things I see sheriff building left, right, and center, I mean, they got to have some kind of connection. But for some reason, the wheels of the bureaucracy are well greased. I'm not making anything about bribery here, but I'm saying those bureaucratic wheels, they don't move easily. They tend to be rusty and corroded, and they creak. But
And
when it comes,
these don't squeak.
when it comes to the sheriff, the wheels don't creak. So, I believe that there is an unfair advantage. Last week, as it was from Mr. Hughes that I first became aware of the transaction between Ed and Sherwin, and I spoke about it. But I had been under attack before by the Guyana Daily News. Guyana Daily News is a vicious online supporter of the PPP government. Vicious. And Mr. Hughes we had researched them early in the week to file an action for defamation against the Guyana Daily News for releasing tax information with an intent to humiliate. So I knew that the Guyana Daily News was a company that had been registered and owned by Mr. Sharif Ahmad, who is the father of Mr. Amir Ahmad and the brother of Mr. Ed Ahmad.
Mm-hmm.
So last week, Saturday, not Saturday, yesterday, the previous Saturday, I was angered by the transaction between Ed and Sherwin because it was further evidence in the public domain about dealings that I felt were not above board between the sheriff group and the and various bureaucrats. And I will say this, that I also believe that the sheriff group, I know for sure that Mr. Amir Ahmad, from historical evidence that I have, has been close to police commissioners in the past. And I rather suspect that his closeness continues to this day. Having said that, I made a number of posts as people close to me, I go manic. And so I made a number of posts that Saturday morning, Saturday the 1st of April, about Ed Ahmad. I called on the Ministry of Agriculture as well to answer. And I would like the press to address this with the Ministry of Agriculture, because we had in short, many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, the government decided that they're going to protect the poultry sector and allow it to grow. That poultry sector was hit by inclusion body hepatitis. The government came up with a good policy of importing chicken, because the chicken is the main staple, main meat, main protein in Guyana, that they were going to import chicken, but they were going to give the chicken to the farmers to sell to their customers so they could still make some money while we're dealing with inclusion body hepatitis. But if you remember years ago, Mr. Dio Singh, who used to own KFC, he was one of the richest men in Guyana. And wanted that because it's from the importation chicken. Importation chicken has big money. In short order, I understand, and I've asked the ministry to advise whether this is true, that the majority of the imported chicken is being sent to the sheriff group. They have a meat center somewhere up at Diamond or somewhere. I do not know if this is true, but I called for that investigation last week, Saturday. I also called for the resignation of Vice President Jagdeo. And so I was on a rampage. I left and I was at home. I left and I went out and to the launching of Miss Simona Brooms's movement. And when I got back, I think they believe I wasn't alone at home. But I had my daughter who was visiting for the first time, she and her husband visiting for the first time in 8 years, and my 2-year-old grandson visiting Guyana for the first time. So I spent most of the time with them in the house. And so we're sitting down chatting, and I look at my phone and I see an allegation from Mr. Amir Ahmad that I called him and threatened him, called him racist names, and threatened to kill him. Mervyn, I say it here and I say it anywhere, and there are many people who testify that I do not use that word, and I ban anybody around me from using that word, including Indo-Guyanese. Even Indo-Guyanese can't use that word around me, right? And they will testify that this goes back decades. That's not the language that I would use. I am told in a message that even pro-PPP people said Terrance does not speak like that. Good. Once I saw that, I'm very familiar with the FCPA. I got mad because the Guyana Daily News has taken over from Live in Guyana, Mervyn. But they are worse in their attacks. And the reason is they got money, Ahmad money behind them. And immediately I sat right there at my dining table while I'm chatting with my daughter, and I fired that report off to the Department of Justice. I did, in my earlier posts, say that I did tag the US Embassy and say you should look into this as a FCPA violation. But once I realized that they were going to try to frame me, I fired it off immediately. And let me tell you, my understanding. So you asked earlier about the Soku story. In that report, I made mention that the vice president is a friend of Ed Ahmad. And therein apparently lies the reason that Soku will be set on Campbell, because he dared to mention the vice president's name in a report filed to the DOJ. So if Soku comes after me, I want the entire nation to know that the real reason is because Campbell mentioned Vice President Jack Dio's name as a friend of Ed Ahmad in his report to the DOJ. That is the reason.
But you also provided photographic evidence of closeness.
I did. I sent my report. I have seen and I have heard I've seen the Travis Chase report, and I have heard, and I believe that it should not end there. I believe that the entire sheriff group, listen, there is an attempt, Mervyn, to separate Amir Ahmad and his father from Ed Ahmad. It may be that there is a falling out in the family, maybe. But it may also be a strategy to separate assets so that when the feds come to make those assets under Amir and his dad untouchable. I'm warning the Ahmads to leave me alone, because the feds have something named RICO for racketeers. This is what they went after the mafia with. And I consider them virtually a mafia. And I am prepared to take this further. They will be well advised to leave me alone. I have walked the straight and narrow in business in Guyana for 40 years of my professional life. They are well advised, leave Terrance Campbell alone. It could get much worse.
The Daily News, Dr. Campbell, before the exposure, they had as their part of their display, part of their
it's still, I think it's still there. The PPP that
it has changed. I'm advised that it's changed.
I have a screenshot.
Yeah.
I had screenshotted before. Mervyn, let me tell you, Terrance Campbell keeps receipts. If you go to my page, you'll see I made a post today. You will see there's a screenshot with the Guyana Daily News and that PPP banner that they had. I keep receipts. I do not play. But let me say something. What happened is that Guyana Daily News is normally owned by Sharif Ahmad. The company has been. This is a company that they will attack you for taxes. Say who is a tax evader and who's not. That company has never filed any annual returns, as far as I know, and was struck off the register in 2019. But on their Facebook page, they are saying paid advertisement, which means they are in business. They are collecting money, right? But nothing has been filed with the registry of deeds, and I doubt that anything has been filed with the with the GRA. I don't know. I don't go asking for people's tax information. But what happened is that Amir Ahmad, who claims in 2020 he was worth US 250 million, he tried to separate himself from the Guyana Daily News. But Amir Ahmad has nothing between his ears. He, on a post, on a comment, the Guyana Daily News, in a comment on a post by James Bond attacking me, the Guyana Daily News said, don't worry with Campbell. He can't take the pressure, essentially. He ran to the US after I filed charges and a lawsuit against him. The words I. Amir has nothing between his ears. If the Guyana Daily News, the person who filed against me is Amir Ahmad.
Clearly.
And if the Guyana Daily News says I, it means Amir Ahmad and the Guyana Daily News are one and the same. And there are 3 defamation suits that should have been filed already. A fourth is coming.
There's a question regarding allegations of tax violations. There seems to be a common instrument being used against people. I note another prominent businessman being bombarded with allegations of that nature, but no legal moves have been made against him either. Now, there's also in the news information regarding unauthorized release of confidential tax information of Dr. Terrance Campbell by some person or persons from the Guyana Revenue Authority, which is the sole custodian of such records. You have initiated legal proceedings in that regard, I understand, or are you contemplating?
The first action against the Guyana Daily News, and we are now going to add Amir Ahmad in his personal capacity, because with that first action is against Guyana Daily News. It would go against the editor Nirmala Ramsewak, and it would go against Sharif Ahmad, his father. But now that Guyana Daily News on James Bond's page has said Amir Ahmad is going to be added to that action. The first action is for release of my tax information, which is illegal, and nothing has been done to prosecute him, which is illegal.
And obviously he'd have to name his source.
Exactly. Then the second actions are going to be from posts that he made last week, with the allegations that I called him and threaten him. Then we're going to add a fourth, which is for saying that I had been arrested on Thursday.
Yeah.
I'm up in the air, and I get a news article saying that I have been arrested. My family is worried. A close friend who has a pacemaker said her heart starts to race. I never went anywhere close to Alberton police station. I went to see. They said, "Y'all want me? Here I am." That was Wednesday. And I went to Brickdam, and I filed a report against Amir Ahmad for false allegations. And I was never arrested. So he's going to get another action for that. And if he wants to continue down the road, we will go. I just want to make sure that when I win my cases before the feds come for everything.
You spoke, you spoke, Dr. Campbell, about at least two instances of surveillance. You detected surveillance vehicles, um, you know, and is this, in your estimation, linked to the suggestion that Soku may have an interest in you for what Daily News called tax evasion?
No, 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 no. So I think I'm under. I've been told. I've received information from a police officer that I'm under surveillance, along with Sharon Greaves. So if Sharon is listening, I want him to know that I've heard that he too is under surveillance. Um, I came out from my house and there was a Toyota Mark X just outside the house. And as soon as they had a visual on me, they drove off. Darkly tinted vehicle that the police would normally use. I was in the presence of, I was going to walk. I see foolish comments on Facebook. How come at 5:30 in the morning? I go and I do 7 miles every single day when I'm wherever I am. So I was coming out. I beefed up my security. 4 security personnel were with me. They saw. There were other people who saw the vehicle acting suspiciously. The vehicle was seen again the second day. But let me tell you what has happened. So if you come to visit me, Mervyn, what I have found is that, at least in one case, and there might be more, Guyana Daily News will now reach out to you, right? Because they have reached out to persons who have visited me and basically tried to entice them to say bad things about me. And the only way they could know who it was, either the police or the Guyana Daily News, again with GRE, GRE would have to provide the vehicle, the ownership of the motor vehicle. All right. So you come to see me, they really don't know you. Well, they'll know Mervyn Williams, but let's say, you want a publicly known figure. They are then running the numbers of people who come to visit me and then reaching out to those people with scandalous accusations, trying to bring me down. And I wish I could read it to you, but basically at the end it says he's a money launderer, he's an abuser, he's a tax evader, and he's not fit to run for president of this country. I don't know that I'm running for president.
Maybe that's the fear.
I don't know that. I have said that I am willing to serve. I'm willing to serve as a constable on the opposition, a united opposition slate. But this has been shared with me, what the Guyana Daily, but they use a fake Facebook account. But what I'm saying at this point, Mervyn, not only did I have a visual on the being surveilled, not only did I receive information from the police on being surveilled, but also someone purporting to act on the Guyana Daily News has been tracking the vehicle numbers of people who come to me, using the GRA as an information base to then go to those people and try to get them into schemes to bring me down. That's how bad it is. The Guyana Daily News, the Ahmad family, they are a cancer on the soul of Guyana that must be excised. It must be removed. I want to be clear. I don't think that everybody in the PPP is cancerous, but they are big cancers in the PPP, and they must be removed, and I'm committing myself to removing them. And I'm telling them, leave me alone, because as happened last week, Saturday, when you probe me, I'm irrational. and my irrationality is to attack in the hardest way, right? The vice president of the party does not like it that his name was on that report. I'm calling the words FBI, I'm calling RICO, and if they continue to probe me, it will be the worst thing that could happen. The PPP and those in authority, and I'm calling on the president, he needs to reel in the Guyana Daily News. And now, hear one thing, Mervyn. I saw where the police said they're trying to find out who really is the Guyana Daily News. The Guyana Police Force, I'm saying to you that on Mr. James Bond page, and y'all know Mr. James Bond, he came and had a courtesy call with Mr. Hicken, and he publicly posted about it. On the page of Mr. James Bond, the Guyana Daily News says, I filed charges against Terrance Campbell. And you know who filed those charges. So go pick up Amir Ahmad right now, right? Because what he has done this week, he has made false allegations against me saying that I was arrested. He has sent the poor and underprivileged of Guyana down to and I hold no brief for the Mohammeds, but he sent them down to have those poor people lining up from early in the morning in front of the premises of the Mohammeds. Those things are wrong. And I'm calling on the president too, that he must ensure we now know in the public domain who is it behind the Guyana Daily News. We thought it was Sharif, but Amir has admitted that he is the person behind the Guyana Daily News. And so now he said, I. And so now the police have no excuse to go pick him up, but they won't pick him up because I believe the police are in the pocket of Amir Ahmad.
Well, there was a person, I believe, by that last name from whom the then acting police commissioner had obtained a sum of $8.5 million to finance a wedding. Is there any connection there, you think? And do you see that there may be an impediment to law enforcement having regard to a transaction of that nature?
There are allegations in the public domain that suggests 8.5 million came from a source for the wedding, and what 8.5 million was passed through a senior police officer and paid over to the Guyana Pegasus for the wedding.
There's a statement from the Commissioner of Police.
I have read a statement, but in fact, this week I was to contact one of the attorneys in that matter to ask him to verify that statement and send it to me. Until I get that receipt verified, yes. But if those allegations are true, it points out how important it is for the Guyana Police Force to do, as they say, physician, heal thyself. It needs to disassociate. And all of this has a bearing on the false allegations that have been produced against me. And I'm telling you, it's not going to end nicely for everybody involved. I'm saying if you're in Mr. Amir Ahmad's pocket and you trouble me, I am in the US. I'm happy to meet with the FBI. I'm happy to meet with those at Homeland Security and those who issue sanctions. I am willing to take it to the highest levels, because what is going on? And we have to prevent this, because what we are shutting off is our democracy, Mervyn. We have private businessmen, private corrupt businessmen who are using their monies, ill-gotten gains, to stifle democracy in Guyana. And it has to stop. And I will not stop fighting it.
I want to rephrase what I said about the statement. There's a statement out there purportedly issued by the acting Commissioner of Police, as he was then.
As he then was,
That statement
has
never been refuted by the holder of that office, who has since been confirmed. That statement was never denied. And that statement has been the subject of discussion on many public fora from then to now. I imagine that if it were something created to cause embarrassment, by now, at minimum, someone would have distanced.
Well, I still stand that it is alleged. I haven't seen the statement, and I meant during this week to contact one of the attorneys for Mr. Brutus to find out whether the statement is true and to have it verified and so on. But the situation is that there is urgent need for reform in the Guyanese police force, and the corruption is bad. But when you are going to allow yourselves to be weaponized against me, mind you, to be fair, I was only told not that Soku acted or visited my premises or raided my premises or anything. I was only told, and listen, Mervyn, I have done so much good in life that the PPP does not understand that deep within their ranks, I have people who are telling me their every single move. So I was only told that Soku would be, and I was told I needed to have $5 million cash. I probably got to do some money laundering on arrival, because Soko's going to hold me, and Karen Bash going to make sure that he charges bail so high that I can't be released immediately. He station bail so high. I needed to walk with at least $5 million in cash on arrival. So we can't listen. This is evil that crawleth across our nation. It has to stop. It must stop. I'm dedicating myself to stopping it. This is not the Guyana I want to see.
All Guyanese embrace Dr. Terrance Campbell and the work that Dr. Terrance Campbell has undertaken. It is personally a very high-risk undertaking, and the efforts are being really, really appreciated by the Guyanese public. Dr. Campbell, your closing remarks on this edition of Nation Watch, because there will be others.
Most important thing for me, at this point, you spoke about the victory which we must have.
Yes.
We must have a victory. And when that victory comes, we must sit down with those decent elements that remain in the PPP.
As few as they are.
As few as they are. We must sit down with them. And we must have a national discussion as to how, look at the challenges that Guyana has encountered since our independence in 1966. And determine what kind of constitutional arrangements will help us to overcome those challenges. What kind of constitution will bring about greater inclusiveness? But before we get there, it's about unity within the party. And I addressed this previously. We must have unity within the party and within the opposition ranks, because that victory to my mind is going to be difficult without unity. If we are divided, the PPP will be stronger. But if we are unified, I see a great likelihood of victory. And with that victory, then our first actions must be to create new arrangements for the governance of Guyana, for transparency, for accountability, for inclusiveness, for everybody to have a seat at the table. And so that is my ultimate goal. My ultimate goal, it's not about the Ahmads. They're just an obstacle along the way to the goal. But the goal is about a different Guyana, a Guyana where all can feel happy, where all ethnicities, where we can rebuild pride. I was out at a Jamaican restaurant last night, and the manager, one of my friends, the manager had on his Jamaican flag and so on. We want to build a Guyana where people are proud that they are Guyanese. We want to build a Guyana where no longer people want to migrate, but people want to return. And these things are possible, I want to see them in my lifetime. I hope I got at least another 20, 25 years. So I want to see them in my lifetime. And that's what I'm working towards. And I'm sure, Mervyn, that's your goal. And that's the goal of the PNC reform. That's the goal. I know for sure that's the goal of my brother and friend, Nigel Hughes, for too long. Since 1980, we were classmates. We argued every day, Mervyn, in class over these things. And we will work to make these things happen. But I want to see unity in the opposition ranks, and then unity in the nation. A more inclusive, a more tolerant, a more compassionate Guyana. A Guyana we can be proud of.
Like you, Dr. Campbell, I am proud of my country, but I'm sorely disappointed in the government that runs it. Thank you very much, sir, for joining me on Nation Watch for this edition. We will be in communication regarding future such involvement in the program if you were so disposed. And to our viewers and listeners across the world, thank you very much for joining us and staying with us throughout this program. And until we meet again, may God bless us all.